Welcome everyone to the Youth Justice Oversight Committee meeting this morning. As you know, I love history and I love trivia, so I did a little research about today in history. So I imagine you all know that on this day in history in 1865, Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox. What you might not know is that 1 year after to the day in 1866, General Grant was arrested in Washington, D.C. for speeding his horse and buggy. So maybe celebrating, I don't know. Also this day in 2009, my favorite comedy Parks and Rec debuted, set in the fictional Hoosier town of Pawnee, Indiana. And in 1959, on this day in history, NASA introduced America's first team of astronauts, including Indiana's own Virgil Gus Grissom from Mitchell, Indiana. I'll be going to his childhood home in the museum in Mitchell. It's part of our court retreat next month. So if you want a little road trip for the summer, there you go. And to tie that all to our role today, I imagine we have some folks in the room who perhaps aspired to be astronauts when they grew up. So thinking about the mission of this group to ensure that all youth reach their full potential. Think back to that time when you're 5 or 6 and looking to your future. What did you want to be when you grew up? So as part of our introduction today, I'd like to hear the answer to that question. What did you want to be when you grew up? So who would like to start that? Nancy?
I actually did want to be an astronaut.
Awesome.
But I get terribly motion sick.
Oh.
So that could never.
All right. Have you been to the Gus Grissom Museum?
I have not.
All right.
You
Judge King?
don't have anything exciting. No astronauts for me.
No?
Everybody around me performers, so I figured I'd be a farmer. I was okay with that. So
another noble profession, feeding all of us. Magistrate Foley.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Apologize for running a little
That's
late.
all right. What did you want to be when you grew up?
Besides older, probably my youngest ambition was probably to be a doctor.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Then I decided that's way too much education for me.
Fair enough.
I don't know how this will go over with the crowd. When I was young, I wanted to be a priest. Yeah. It didn't go that route for me.
You do wear the black robe, so right.
Nicole Phillips, Bartholomew County Probation. I wanted to be a nurse. My mom was a nurse, and I admired her greatly until I realized I don't like bodily fluids. So I wasn't going to work out.
I too wanted to be a nurse, and I actually started my college career as a nurse, and then decided I wanted to be an officer. So make that phone call home to your parents.
I'm Amy Richardson. I'm going to date myself. I really wanted to be a solid gold dancer.
Amorous.
My dad was a teacher growing up. I wanted to be a teacher, and then I wanted to be a lawyer. So I kind of get to do both.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be a chef.
Do you cook now? Do you cook for your family?
Yeah, I look at it.
Okay. Fair enough. Dr. Alsma?
And also, I grew up on a Wisconsin dairy farm because we did not want to be a farmer. Archaeologist in Indiana too.
After going Indiana Officer for Services, I also wanted to be an astronaut in space camp twice.
Ooh.
Cool. So I wish I started college when I was being an astronaut. Then I took a few courses that made me realize I was smarter. Yeah, science.
Morning, Doug Hunsinger from the Justice Institute. I actually started college with the intent to be a field director.
Oh. All right. That might be the first I've ever heard that.
Big step up.
Liz, how about you?
Good morning. I'm Liz Hodak from the Public Defender Council. I really wanted to be a veterinarian, partly because my dad had terrible allergies, so we couldn't have pets. So I think that kind of sparked wanting to be around pets.
I wanted to be an actress, and my mom said, "You need a backup plan." So lawyer was my backup plan.
But the astronaut all day. But interestingly, I took one of those very early program tests that was terribly well done. So I first taken it, I got my score right, and I got astronauts and steered correctly, and then I came with 500 pounds and on the floor.
All right. All right. And I will join Tracy. I wanted to be a teacher as well. I had a toy chalkboard and I taught my stuffed animals lots of things growing up. So, yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with just a quick overview of the meetings with the work group chairs. And I provided to you a little bit of a handout of information that came from that and an ask at the end. So I'm just going to walk through that. And first of all, I met with all of the current co-chairs of all of the work groups. Appreciate your time and input, all of you. And several ideas, brainstorms came out of those meetings. First idea is regarding the diversion directory. So I'm curious to know if we can figure out how much traffic that directory is getting. Don't have an answer to that yet, but would like to know that. And in the event that it is helpful and useful to folks out there, would it make sense to expand that to include other types of programming? So community alternatives to detention, grant funded programs, that sort of thing, behavioral health programming, also to provide that information to communities out there without similar services and looking to perhaps start services with YJOC grant funding. Also, idea to expand to include outcomes and to highlight quality programs on that. So perhaps pull out some of those programs contained in the directory and show data, show cost savings, that sort of thing, to share with other communities as well. So that's one idea. Another idea in talking through priority setting for the Youth Justice Oversight Committee is to look at perhaps ad hoc groups with defined tasks. So asking someone not to sign their name in blood for all eternity, but to ask someone to serve on a work group to accomplish defined task over the course of a year, 6 months, whatever this group sets as a priority. The other tweak or version of that could be a standing work group that would cover hot topics. So whatever the changing priority is as tasks are accomplished, to take on the new task that's set by this group. After we figure out this group sets priorities, hopefully at the June meeting, look at what disciplines or what other groups are already working on those issues and choose the ones that are not being addressed by any other group to address them here in the YJOC work, so that we are filling the gaps and not redoing something that's being done elsewhere. Ideas of priority areas, and I put a question mark by many of these because these are just brainstorms at this point. I'm throwing these out to you as idea starters for you to think about, and I'm going to be asking each of you to come to the June meeting with your discipline, your community's top 3 needs or top 3 priorities that you would suggest we address here at the YJOC. But the grouping of areas that came up during those co-chair meetings were public safety. So I think we're seeing, unfortunately, a lot of really heinous things going on with some of our youth. We see a lot of gun involvement among our youth. Tracy said something really interesting, and I think it's a great point, and that is, it seems to be a foregone conclusion that youth kind of rightfully believe that they need guns for self-defense. So how do we flip the script and change that dialogue? Rather than accepting that at face value, how do we get the youth to think through that? How do we get the family to think through that, and interrupt that thinking? Because we know that when you put a gun in the hand of a young person whose brain is not fully formed, they're impulsive, really terrible things happen. So that was part of the conversation. So I appreciate, Tracy, you bringing up that point, which I think is a really great one. Another is safe storage, gun safe storage. I hear from juvenile judges that it seems to be easier to get a gun than it is a beer in some communities. And so that's really disheartening and something I think deserves some thought. The next idea came from Judge Dolahanty. Thank you, Judge Dolahanty, at the last meeting, and that is think through problem areas in the juvenile code, statutes that are creating issues in implementation, and thinking through solutions to those well in advance of the next legislative session. Gathering information from trial court judges, gathering information from probation officers, law enforcement. What are those areas that are challenging, and how can we help in those areas? The next is parent engagement. And I note that in the child welfare realm, every case has a parental participation order. Everyone. It's just a matter of course. But in the delinquency world, I think that's probably a rarity. Why is that? Why don't we use more parental participation plans? Why don't we focus on tailored plans for families, and do better in the realm of engaging families, incorporating parents, and procedural fairness is really the outcome of that engagement. The next is this continuing detention bed question. Do we have space for the juveniles who do present high community safety risk? We have detention center potentially closing in Clark County. I don't know the update on that most recently. Tippecanoe building a detention facility. We continue to hear from facilities that we have beds, but we don't have staff for those beds. And so we can't operate to capacity. So staffing is an issue. And then youth substance use. I think we can't gloss over this because that continues to be a significant problem. And Dr. Alsma, I'd like you to share, if you don't mind, cannabis trends.
Yeah, well, I think cannabis from our day, thinking about how we just talked about 80s, 90s, very different from cannabis today. The trends tend to be 1 in 5 youth that use cannabis, a week or 2 for substance use disorder by 18. That's the same for alcohol. That's what has traditionally been for cannabis. But now in the last 10 years, with the high potency of THC in all cannabis products, it's 1 in 2 only criteria if they have used by 18. So we just need to do a better job of educating, of intervening, of addressing, because cannabis today is very different than it was even 10 years ago. Yeah. Soapbox done over.
I have a question. What about the mental health implications too? Isn't there like a shift?
There's a significant shift with early psychosis. So it's very clear that this is one of those triggers for the minority of youth that are at high risk for having psychosis. They're seeing more young people shift into psychosis due to cannabis use. There's some other medical problems as well, but yes, this is it's not correlation, it is clearly causation. And it's a real concern with a lot of our colleagues in psychiatric mental settings. Yeah.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Alsma. So those are brainstorms for your fodder. As you think through, do these fit with what's going on in your community? Is this what you're seeing? Are you seeing other priority areas, other needs? So be thinking about those things between now and the June meeting. And I would ask that each of you bring your top 3 priorities and be prepared to talk as a group about the direction we take, whether that be ad hoc, whether that be hot topics group, or assigning these tasks to some existing group, so that we have clear guidance going forward on what we're trying to accomplish. And I would note that between now and June 11th, the judges have a lot of conferences. So we'll have a lot of opportunity to talk to our colleagues at those various conferences and district meetings. And I'm just guessing that each of your disciplines has similar conferences or activities coming up. So as you meet in committee meetings, board meetings, and run across your colleagues, please ask them the same questions. What do you need and how can we help? All right, so you have your homework. How exciting is it that you have a homework sheet to take with you today? All right, we'll move right into the Commission on Improving the Status of Children update. Mark?
I'll present from down here since I have like multiple screens up front of me and all that good stuff as usual. Main update that we want to go through some of the stuff we talked about legislative wise from our last meeting. There was actually, for being a very short session, a lot of stuff moving around. So want to at least put a pin in some of these items and then have some discussion about ones we might want to be following in the interim and seeing how we could get involved in them. I will note a very big trend this session was a lot of swatting flies with legislation that was moving on through that we kind of had to intercept and do some language tweaks and fixes and stuff along the way. So it really spelled out the need for us being more active and involved before legislative session and make sure we got language right, that we're dialoguing with legislators, that when we have the same intent, but a few words change it in the bad direction, that we're having those discussions way ahead of time. We've all been there where we get something 90% of the way done and then somebody raises their hand and says, oh, you can't do that. It's not a good way to build relationships, right? So I'll cover a few things that we had and then highlight some of those areas for you. The one big bill for child welfare that we saw and we've still seen a lot of discussion on is Senate Bill 171. This one is going to probably have a lot of discovery as it gets enacted because it has about, I counted 40 different elements in it. The core area that's gotten the most discussion in Senate Bill 171 has been the idea of not moving children in response to somebody filing for adoption of a child. So the idea that they're moved out of a foster home into another one if that foster parent files for adoption was one of the issues that we saw bring forward by certain groups. But it opens up some other questions of, well, what happens if that move is to do trial home visits? It's working on that reunification element with the birth family. So there's a lot of stray elements in there. And really, we could probably spend this entire meeting just going through 171 because I've already done several meetings where we're talking about just 171. A lot of good intentions still on working on that time to permanency and keeping things expedited and moving through. Still looking at where that balance is for what some of the birth parent rights are versus finding alternative placements for them. But it does do a few good things as far as noting specific items that should be considered by the courts when they're looking at making their decisions for out-of-home placement. So making sure that they're looking at things the same. Is this one that if reunification were to fail, they might be an option for permanent placement? Do they have the ability to take on additional siblings if we're trying to keep the sibling group intact? Are they proximate to the birth parent home? So if we're working at making reunification attempts, how's that going to go? Is this foster parent open to working with the birth parent on those items? So it develops what is a lot of this is already existing DCS practice, but I think it really helps put that in a checklist of things. We're making sure that when we're looking at when we place a child, are we checking all of the key variables that can make that a successful placement? There's a few elements that are watched really closely now, like geography is usually a big one. Proximity to other family members is a big one. But this actually puts it down in writing. I was talking to Leslie about the specific list and said, this probably been something that could have been done a while ago to just get that down in code and have that in there. So that's one I would urge folks, and I'll be noting that that's one that there'll probably be room for us to work on tweaks and fixes once we see how it gets implemented between this legislative session and the next one. So if we end up with a subgroup that's working on legislative items, I would expect that one to very much be on that list. So not to gloss over, but again, there's a lot of complexity in that one. So it really needs its own carve out on Did have some other good ones. So Senate Bill 246 added redaction in court records, noting that basically the biggest thing is trying to get away from things that could be potential identifying of a child in the court record. So definitely wanting to replace things like the use of initials. Small community, it's kind of easy to pick up on initials sometimes about who we're talking about, especially if it's something that was already in the news or people are already talking about. So going into formatting, it's more about like child witness 1, child witness 2, things like that to identify them, and looking at doing that a little bit better as we move forward. So we're not, again, making it so those kids are getting stigmatized in the process of going through the court process. Other specific items we did have with House Bill 1036. This one got a little discussion too, saying that we need to put eyes on the child directly before closing out cases at the conclusion of assessment, or dismissing or terminating a pending Chin's case. This was based on a handful of cases where it was deemed that the DCS worker hadn't directly seen and checked on the welfare of the individual child. And then we found there was a fatality or large scale abuse and neglect happening for those cases. So just putting it again in writing there, something the DCS is certainly doing by their practices, but one that it was felt that we needed to just get that in code and make sure that we're laying that out more correctly. One that we talked about, I think at the last meeting that was originally Senate Bill 140 was called doxing, which since we're all cool, that of course means dropping docs. Or putting out publicly information about somebody with the intent that it would cause them harm. So here's where this person lives. They show up at 5 o'clock every day. Somebody should be there waiting for them. And putting that out on social media. This started from the redistricting stuff from last year, where some legislators were getting threats similar in that manner. But we discussed it here specifically and saying, this is one we want to be a little cautious on, because a very typical youthful behavior on social media is some of these types of things. Some more egregious than others, but posting people's homeroom schedules or where they work, and somebody should cause a scene for their boss and get them fired and things like that, out of retaliation of relationships gone wrong and stuff. We wish we could say it was uncommon. It's very, very common. So we're looking at thousands of cases. And it also, in its original form, had that if somebody acts on the information and causes bodily harm, it could escalate up to a felony level. So basically, you're thinking about this for youthful minds, right? Saying one youthful mind makes the poor decision of putting something out there online just to try to scare somebody or just because they're angry. And then another youthful mind acts on that, maybe because they also have a beef with that person. Now we've got a very complex case, possibly some life-changing charges coming out of that. So we did let the legislature know that, we understand the intent was about very specific adult cases and members of the General Assembly. We might want to look at how we can shift some things around to keep it in that vein. So they moved that whole area that would have been a new type of charge and put it under the intimidation statute. And still added some good definitions. So it defines what posting is, what a social media platform is, what personal information that could be on there is. But it takes out that secondary part where if somebody acts on it, there could be a charge against the individual who posted it. And it really dials it in much more and saying this is about one, establishing intent, that the intended harm to happen to that person. And then delineates more that if the aggravators are towards if it's a member of the General Assembly, prosecuting attorney, judicial stakeholders, et cetera, to make it a little bit more clear for a judge that's having to interpret this and saying, if I get a youthful offender that has done this type of action, we're probably looking at something more diversionary. Maybe some programming that we would love to have developed, of course, about saying better online skills and how when you post things online, it is very public and there's ongoing consequences for that. But what can we do to pull that in? Something that's more appropriate for that youthful offender there. So I think that ended in a better place. And it still at the same time defines a type of cyberbullying. So if we want to look at, you've got a school where maybe it's just getting rampant and bad things are happening, you have the ability to intervene and look at proper programming to get on top of it. And we have something in code too. So we like that balance a little bit better. One last one that we looked at, that we interacted with a little bit, there was an expungement bill that was looking at, expungements had a few different journeys, and some of you in the room probably know about it. So as a separate juvenile and adult expungement, and then there was some combination that happened. So there was a bill that was looking at separating that back out again, but kind of dragged some of the adult language with it. So things like it was using words like arrest when it should have been charged, etc. So that bill, we pointed out a few things with it with the authors. It was a good chunk through session. Again, not my favorite time to play intercept on things, but they were kind enough to say, well, let's let that one die for this session and come back and make some improvements of what we actually intended to do, looking at coming sessions. So we're not going back to the expungement statute, which is a piece to itself, every 3, 4, 5 years, fixing things that sometimes we created the problem by not getting them up with just right. So that'd be another example of one I think this group might have some play in saying, let's look through that and comb through that and get it actually right. So it works not just at the ideological level or to the outside stakeholder, but pragmatically when you've got to be the folks that get it right in the system and look at how we have to have things put into the system for them to be removed properly from the system and expunging. All those other elements there. So again, just a sampling, but those are some of the bigger items that I think impact this group directly. I would note one bill that didn't unfortunately get a hearing where we were looking at our parent visitation and call privileges. That was saying that twice a week of in-person and of phone contact for juveniles in facilities. And just kind of setting that floor that was not able to get a hearing, mainly because it was a very busy, very short session with a lot of other issues, and that was kind of a brand new one. So we've already got commitments to say for next session, we're going to hit the ground running. We spent a lot of time last session, like right up to the last minute, just getting the bill written and introduced. We've got the bill, we've got the language, we've got all the stakeholders lined up. So we're going to be able to go into this session months earlier. Usually we would have November, December to do some communication and a lot of work and outreach to the legislature. But since the redistricting fight took up really all of that time, it shortened us dramatically. And we also lost a month of how long the session would usually be at the end because they were trying to make up for time spent in those early months before session started. So not one that's going anywhere, but one we're going to come right back to and say, well, let's get it across the finish line. Not a controversial one, not a one we had any protest on. We've got everybody lined up on it. We just need to have a better pathway than we happen to have had. And I'll touch on one item that we had that was not brought up this session in legislature, but we definitely see that there's some work that needs to be done and some extra things that might turn into legislative pieces, but definitely practice pieces as well. And that's looking at the concept of the safe baby courts. This is something the legislature passed a couple of sessions ago, and it's had a hard time getting off the ground. As we've looked in it, I talked to various members of the courts team, Christine, who's with us today, and Leslie, and said, well, what do we need to do to get these off the ground and make it a concept that really works? Part of what we're looking at is the safe baby courts were put in the part of code that is for problem-solving courts. But the safe baby courts, really, when you look at how they were created in the different jurisdictions that put them in play, it's really the full title is Safe Baby Courts Team Approach. It's more about an overlay about how a court reacts when there's a 0 to 3 case. And what do we make sure we have in place? What kind of team do we assemble around that? For large jurisdictions, that could be a court on its own. So looking at some of our Lake County and stuff like that, maybe. But for smaller jurisdictions, building a specific problem-solving court just for the 0 to 3s might be a little bit trickier based on how many cases they get. But can we bring in the right overlay, the right supports, the right linkages, and kind of more that best practice manual where we've got to go to saying this is how we're going to forward for this case. I think that's going to be a little easier stuff. So we've got a lot of reinvention to do there. I'm sure I'll be talking to many of you about what that can look like and how we can get that more off the ground in a way that makes sense. But it does look like going into the full-on certified problem-solving court model is really not how it's functioning in most places in the country. And that might actually be creating a barrier for some of the exact counties that could benefit from having some of these practices in play. So more to come on that. I think we've got some good possibilities going forward. And thanks all the people at the Office of Court Services for seeing us get our heads together and figure out a right way to move something forward instead of butting our heads against the wall for 2 years, because I think we've got a good plan there. So I can exhale now. So that's most of my stuff. As you can see, there's quite a bit of teasing in there too, though, that we'll have legislation for 2027 going into that. My ask definitely with YGOC is we look at whether it's a subgroup or an ongoing dialogue at this group. Can we have a place where we're specifically working on some of these issues ahead of time? So those that are interested in getting involved in that legislative end and want to be a direct part of that, so we can be active, proactive on some of these items instead of just all the fun of hearing Mark report at the meetings about them and where things are at. Digging in and getting it right and building some better legislative relationships, hopefully along the way too, where they know start here on some of these issues, so we can give you the information to do it the way that we all want to see it.
Questions for Mark? And as we think about the groups or the tasks going forward, we'll still need to keep in mind the structure of the YJOC. So work groups can only have one member of the full YJOC committee in order to live stream and do, or not live stream remote hearings or meetings. Yeah, so we'll need to make sure that we're looking to other people to add to our grouping here. So if you have people in your community who are on fire about a particular topic and would be great on a work group, let us know that as well. Or if you have colleagues in other communities, let us know that so that we can put together a really passionate team around each of the priority areas that we do set going forward. Yes.
Does that move apply to excuse me, ad hoc group?
You know, that's a great question, Nancy. Yeah. Let's figure that out, Mark.
Yeah, and that's a question I'm going to make sure I get an answer on. It would also be, since now, and this was part of when we look at the YGOC being a committee under the CISC. So anything that gets created under the YGOC was also something that be deemed a third tier group. So it's further removed from the decision making. So I think we have a little bit more play there. It'd be more so about, do we have multiple leadership members of the CISC down there? Because the intent is, are you sneaking all your people to make the final decision into the lower levels, so there's really nobody making the decision except for them, right? That's the intent, and we want to get away from that. So I think there's some room to work on, especially for carved out ad hoc groups. We have one group that just wants to work on expungement, one that wants to work on the stuff in Senate Bill 171. Well, that could be a totally different animal. And we also know there's multiple groups that are interested in working on some of these items that are more than just YGOC. So it could be something that's ancillary to that just makes recommendations should be flown up. So I think there's a pathway to do that, but we're going to be careful that we do it the right way.
Thanks for asking that, Nancy. Mm-hmm. Other questions or comments regarding Children's Commission or any of the legislation that he mentioned?
I guess I have one more question.
Yeah.
I feel like you had an ask of this group, or about legislation. Are we responding to that, or did I misunderstand?
No, more so about, I mean, as we get into, and I know Judge Kenworthy started the discussion a little bit, if we get into creating some of those subgroups and carving it out. So some of the legislation I mentioned, such as the expungement one, such as Senate Bill 171, Senate Bill 111, which was the visitation bill, if we'd want to look at building something that works with that, especially between sessions. So that would be my discussion point on that as we look at the possibility of creating those subgroups.
Thank you.
All right. Any other discussion?
We just really need to have a lot of judges and prosecutors involved in those instances when we're talking about, like you're talking about safety courts. I'm thinking in my mind the different families that I have. That's great that I have 5 kids. Only one meets 0 to 3.
Yes.
So then do I go to state baby court? Do I go to something else? Mm-hmm. Also, just trying to keep track. Everything else now, I'm flagging everything for the 15-month no services. July 1st, I got to flag it for 12 months no services. And I got to tell everybody every single time. So I'm not complaining, I'm just saying there are a lot of mental gymnastics that take place with every single case. And if we don't have the people doing the mental gymnastics to weigh in on that, I think we're going to have good intentions like you've talked about, but we're not going to achieve the outcomes that we want when there's not real conversation about that.
Yeah, and I think that's
It gets harder.
yes.
I think 171 and I read through it and I'm like, oh my gosh, all these criteria. So now am I really looking at reunification or am I looking at placing a child with somebody who's going to be a permanent placement because they seem to convert with one another? And so those kind of things that you're constantly playing with need to be vetted by the people that are making those choices.
Yeah, that absolutely, and actively and ahead of time. So if there's 171's a great example, its implementation will take some time, but if we can start getting feedback, say, look, are there a few pieces of easy cleanup that we can suggest well ahead of time that would make it function as intended without creating barriers? Safe baby court teams one would be another one, is saying, instead of saying, let's build this out as another problem solving court model that you then have to say, I've already got problem solving courts. Am I playing two at the same time or how am I doing this? Saying, can it be an overlay of systems and supports that come and make it an easier process by giving the courts the roadmap of what to do in these cases, largely based on outside providers coming in and supporting the family better. So yes, we need to have the judicial community active at the table of this, so it doesn't just become something that feels like another mandate down of how do I fit this in with all of the other things.
And I will just mention as for 171, the version that passed is quite different than the original version, which would have been much more challenging. I still think there's tweaks to be made there for sure. And I think the implementation is going to bear out some of that, particularly the provision that Mark mentioned regarding adoption petitions, kind of stopping placement change. So is a parent's home a placement under the law? So there are just some unanswered questions at this point, and we're going to figure that out over the next year in implementation of that. So, Magistrate Richardson, you bring up good points regarding safe baby courts. So I think problem solving courts in some other states use an infusion model. So taking principles of problem solving courts and infusing those across the board into the regular court system. And as Mark mentioned as well, I think the larger jurisdictions may very well have a population that fits a specialized court. But thinking back to family recovery court, that would be a difficult fit. You know, what do you do when the child turns 3? Do you then transfer them? You know, what if mom has a 7-year-old? Does she fit here or there? You know, those sorts of questions are just logistically challenging. So if you have people in your community that you think would be interested in serving, send them our direction. Yeah. Other discussion regarding legislation? Children's Commission. All right. And we'll move right into our work group updates, starting with Doug, who has an update on our grants.
Thank you, Judge Kenworthy. I am very pleased to report that we received 46 applications in our last round, which greatly exceeds the number that we expected. That totals about $12.6 million in ask, a little under what we were thinking we might receive, but ultimately this puts us just under or almost at having half of the fund obligated. Once we get these awards, we'll be somewhat under a half. They're currently in the process of being reviewed. I believe next week we have meetings with the independent group that is not connected to this group that makes those recommendations for us so that we're able to have those deliberations not via Teams where everybody can watch. We have not set a date for the next round. That is something that once we receive or once we get through this application process, we will sit down and figure out what the next round looks like. We are having discussions around whether we need to provide additional technical assistance to those grantees who we may not be awarding funds to, but have viable plans for their communities. And so what might that look like? We've added some additional resources to the grants work group that can maybe help provide some of that technical assistance. The one thing I will say is we'll be having more discussions around the funding formula as we continue to hear that there are needs in diversion and community alternatives, but that funding formula does create barriers for communities who have been participating in this program. We will, in probably the next 9 months, have to start having conversations around sustainability for our first round of grantees that were granted funds 3 years ago, 2 years ago. So our first round of funds will be coming due. We have extended all of them. They're all on no cost extensions right now. And so we know there are a handful of those who would like to reapply for these dollars. And that is not something that we have addressed in any way at this point. So, questions?
So 46 is more than we've ever had, right? In one cycle. So I think that's great news. A lot of behavioral health programming requests. So it's good to see.
Yes, there are new counties, a number of new. We can provide some more detailed information. Our goal right now is to get them.
That's the fun part.
Yes,
Reading
and
46 applications.
There's some complications around multiple organizations requesting multiple different counties within one application, and so trying to unpack who is doing what in each county. I know many of you around the table have been helpful as we have those conversations to understand what's taking place in your communities, and thank you for that, because we want to make sure that these dollars are going to the groups that are going to have an impact in the system, not working on kind of the fringes or hoping to get these dollars and then build.
So just a comment shows that reducing these barriers can really increase the number of applications. That's so good work. And then when people apply, do they have a section talking about sustainability, like a plan?
Yeah, so every application that I've ever been involved in asks the question, what's your sustainability? And I think the most honest answer I've ever gotten was during opioid settlement funding that round that we had for matching funds. Yeah. And the honest answer is you are our sustainability. Right. We're gonna do all the things. We're gonna fundraise. We're gonna go after other grants. We're gonna look at other opportunities to, will Medicaid cover some of these services? But frankly, that only gets you so far. And for many of these programs, we are the sustainability.
Yeah. So that might be just something to think about as we're thinking about ad hoc committees. Could there be some expert advice or state advice to local folks about rated funding, different streams? So yeah, I'm glad you've thought about this for a long time. I keep thinking about it. When you saw the whole ready.
Other questions for Doug? Just thanks again, whole team. Yeah, so thank you, grants team, for doing awesome work and making this easier for the counties across the state. Next up, we have Dr. Alsma.
Yeah, I'm seeing my co-chair, Chris, as well. So you can see our report summary. We have shifted from phase 1 pilot, and we did send out reports to all of the courts that provided data, thanking them, and we did get some follow-up from some individual courts that asked some more questions. That was really fantastic, learning about their own data quality and what that looks like for them. And now we're in this next phase with 6 pilot counties: Bartholomew, Huntington, Johnson, Madison, Marion, Ripley, many of whom are part of this committee, which is fantastic, which is a deeper dive into data quality. So we're right in the midst of that. And I guess one thing to highlight, since sustainability has already come up, is part of the sustainability plan with this is to explicitly partner with our IOCS Justice colleagues that do a deep dive around JDI and data for detention in terms of this earlier part, particularly around probation, in terms of data quality, data improvements. So when we shift to this next phase, that there will be people that can continue that work. I think one thing just to report that isn't really in this report here is for a lot of our counties that have looked at data for a long time, they would really love some longer term solutions on the data quality and data connectedness. Not sure exactly what that can look like in today's time and information sharing age, but there are some solutions in other fields that people have come up with around back-end data sharing, management performance hub. Right now, we're really focused on data standardization. So we really understand what's going in and what's coming out. But there's that desire. So we're really thinking about that. That will be part of the report that I even in partnership with our data committee kind of finalizes is how can we really not just sustain this good work as data quality, it can't stop, it's an ongoing process, but could there be some back-end solutions at court services, report level to help with data entry and data continuity? That's a lot of vague terms. Any questions about all of that? Any feedback from any of our partner counties so far in process? Nicole loves it. Yeah.
It's been good for us. I mean, it's exposed a lot of things that we needed to know, but it's been really good for us to identify where our gaps and inconsistencies are. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I would agree. It's confirmed that we're doing a lot of things that we should be doing, but there are some improvements that we do need to make. So I'm excited about it.
Yeah, so to think about those solutions that can be sustainable, and then again, longer term back-end solutions. That'll be
My feedback is it hasn't been too onerous. We track for a small county, we track a lot of data. You know, I asked yesterday, how's that going? They're like, this is all stuff we can buy. But that's just, we're a small county too, so I'm sure a bigger county, that's more difficult.
well, more difficult. They also have more staff and people dedicated, and so you know, there's a plus and minus with.
That's usually my state.
Well, you told me to say that. That's changed.
Thank you for that.
One of my favorite quotes is, "How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time." So I so much appreciate that you're taking this enormous task and breaking it into manageable chunks with a plan. So to eat the elephant. Thank you, Dr. Alsma. Chris, anything you want to add? All right. Yes, Nancy.
Dr. Osmond, I understand that you shared the final report with the individual counties. Has the final report been shared with this group? I think you shared it with the data work group, but.
We did.
With YJOC?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, if anyone wants to, at the last meeting, the other board feedback before.
Yeah, I think I even
Yep, right here.
Okay, I have it. I didn't know if it had been shared. With
I
us,
think it
but
got
I thought, thank you, sorry.
Thank you.
It's a really good report, by the way. If you have any time, I would strongly suggest you read it because it has a lot of information and it's like digestible.
Well, and I think some more talking from Dr. Alswick, that's what PhDs do. The diversion part for us was super eye-opening. We really didn't really need to lay in the land. So super thank you for our diversion colleagues that have now had this directory up, and we'll look at traffic to that said directory. But on the information side of things, there's a lot of important work and some amazing programs out there.
Any other questions for Dr. Alsma or discussion about data? All right. Next up, behavioral health, just a quick update, and that is that we are looking at a similar group working on the Children's Commission side and trying to determine the course of our behavioral health work group. Is that going to be another merger? Is it going to stay separate? We're looking at the tasks that we have on this side of things and trying to figure that out. So more to come on that. And now we move into the portion of the meeting where I hear from you all what's going on in your world. And if you have had a chance to think about the questions and homework that I proposed at the beginning of the meeting and want to share that today, feel free to do that. But why don't we start on the opposite side of the table, Mark, this time?
Millions. That's I for not ever. Why your teeth is just everything else. Big lip, be very replacement.
Congrats, Blaine. Leslie? Okay, Liz?
I don't think I have any big updates. The Public Defender Council did post a link to the diversion directory on our public website, and I guess we have some data tracking, but I don't know how much traffic we'll get specific to that, but I'll report back.
Great, thank you. Doug?
Yeah, the Institute has applied for 2 new grants recently, not in this space, but we are working to build our capacity to be able to partner on other grants. So as you come across things, there are some things, especially funding from the Department of Justice. There are a number of them where perhaps we are the designated entity that has to apply. And so we're evaluating those to see if we can be hopeful or if there are other communities that we're aware of. This will take us some time. We've had to already pass on some that I'd really like to do. We just don't have the full capacity at this point yet. But that's where we're headed. So I don't think we've applied for new grants in 10 years. So at least in 10 years. So this is a space that will be more active in the future, but we will need some time to ramp up our capacity.
Thank you, Doug. Catherine?
Going on at IRCS. One of the things that the court at large and then OJA and on that the IRCS is looking at kind of gets at the idea of work groups and ensuring that we're not duplicating efforts, but working where the gaps are. In an organization as large as OJA, that is a struggle. And so we're looking at ways, trying to be thoughtful and intentional about not doing this, creating ways to make sure that we're not working in silos. So I'll be interested, I'll be thinking about the homework, but interested in the idea of if we create work groups, what I just want to be careful about what that would create in terms of the work that's being done. So that's my sort of first thought about our homework.
Thank you. Dr. Alsma?
Kind of related to homework, but since I talked about cannabis already, there are some great courts that have tackled this problem. So Judge Graham, Rebecca Humphrey, they have a program where it's an automatic expulsion for a young person that has cannabis at school, and it's ubiquitous. Instead, they do treatment in-house, and then refer out if needed. There's some really good programs out there that are diversion related that are effective in helping people. So let's keep sharing and disseminating.
Steve?
Nothing really major. Kind of taking a look, I think we kind of talked about the standardization of the data and how that's looking. And I think as we start to get our hands around some better data, it's looking more consistent, kind of shifting from spotlighting data and saying like, here it is and all of that to say, okay, because that tends to take a punitive approach, I think, more broadly. And then how do we turn that into like continuous improvement? How do we focus on shifting and percentage increases and decreases rather than counts, try to help the kids rather than just counting incidents.
Tracy?
I just have kind of a brag about my wonderful co-chair, Megan Horton, who's not here today, but and it's kind of for our whole data group and the YJC as a whole, but she submitted to do a workshop for a diversion conference, and her submission was selected. So she's going to New Hampshire, I think in June, to tell them all about Indiana's diversion toolkit and our diversion directory that are online and how that's going. And I believe Kay Nora from Marion County is probably going with her to talk about how you can implement the diversion, at different points in the system. So I'm very excited that they're doing that and bragging a little bit about our work.
Thank you, Tracy.
Well, recently in Huntington, we've been trying to identify where our gaps exist once we get our diagnostic evaluations on our juveniles. And then it sounds awesome, all of the services that they can benefit from, but then identifying who those service providers are going to. And so we've been really blessed that we have a therapist, she's a psychologist who had been in our community, left our community, just came back and is starting a new practice. And so with those conversations, one of the big things we continue to get are these DBT groups for juveniles. We don't have one in Huntington County. Nobody provides that service. So she's agreed to start that service for us. So just starting to feel like we're making a little bit of headway about filling those gaps for the DNEs and what we can actually do for the kids, because it can be really defeating to see all of the things the kids need. And then maybe we have one or two of the services available, but they were recommended for 10 different things. So just trying to work through that is kind of the heavy lift we're trying to do for 6 months. I wish it's starting to make a little progress. So that's encouraging.
Great news.
I have nothing.
So I didn't tell Michelle Hinkle I was going to do this, so she might kill me. Tell her I'm sorry. I am presenting a session at the Justice Services Conference on predispositional reports. And Magistrate Long from our county was going to present with me. We did it a couple years ago. She likes to have a probation officer and a magistrate or judge perspective. Magistrate Long has resigned, so I no longer have a judge to present with me. So if there is a magistrate or judge in this room or that you know who is really passionate about predisposition reports and wants to present with me on the last session of the last day of the Justice Services Conference, please reach out to me or Michelle.
The confidence a lot.
Yeah.
Judge Delahanty?
Well, thank you. I don't really have a group that I represent as a senior judge, but the legislation piece is something that just is always pounding in my head. The further you get removed from day to day judging, I have found the less all of this legislative noise impacts my day. And then we get to, we're in session, we're getting towards the close of session. Here's all these bills. Here's where they are. The Office of Court Services does a great job of sending out a regular email to us to update us on where things are. There's always a little bit of slip between the lip and cup about due to lag time between when they can type it up and when we can read it. But they do a great job of keeping us up to date. We get towards the end of session. There's all of this that's starting to boil over a little bit, and you don't really know what's coming your way. So the way I've been thinking about it is perhaps we would be well served to break it into two functions. One, things that we want to be proponents of, right? Where do we see action needs to be made or had initiated? And then, because there's always going to be legislative proposals that we don't really hear about until there's a bill that's drafted and submitted and everybody's going, what's this one? That's just the nature of the beast because of the separation of the branches, that there's not a collaborative effort in front. So if maybe, just one suggestion, maybe we could think about tackling some of this in that two-step approach. What do we want to be proponents of? And what do we want to be reactive to, but assistive to as well? How can we help legislators that are trying to do something positive of a policy nature? How can we help them understand, okay, that's your call as the legislative branch to formulate policy, but how can we help you make it work in the real world, right? Because there's always just a gap there. The great intention versus what's going to actually work because of realities of the business. So I've been trying to put it into those two buckets of thought as I figure out what I can do to help not just this group, but the Judges Association and the Juvenile Council as well with legislative actions.
Thank you. Judge Delahanty.
It's a big task. We've got a lot of projects in the air right now. I think the one that's closest to completion is we are redoing our video advisement of initial hearing rights for our youth. The last one we did was in 2019, and it uses a lot of really big words, which we are all constantly having to redefine in the courtroom as kids come in and say, I have no idea what any of that is about. So we actually had several of our public defenders as well as a couple of our deputy prosecutors sat down with Magistrate Pappas and myself, and we actually rewrote our script. And in partnership with the Allen County Public Library, they actually shot a video with all of these graphics. So it's not just talking heads and boring as it was previously. And they actually gave that as a free service to us. So for other courts, your public library might be an option for you with the video if you're going that direction. But we've paid to have the new advisement translated into Burmese as well as Spanish, and they're going to do voiceover. So it's going to be 3 judicial officers, including myself, with 2 male, a Burmese interpreter and a Spanish interpreter. So it's going to be my mouth moving and their voice talking. So we're very excited about this.
Will those be ready by the Juvenile and Family Conference?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know, because we've kind of given everything to the public library. So
I could see that being a very exciting resource at that conference, an idea. So just put that out there.
All right. I know. They're amazing.
Judge King?
Well, I guess this might be a good time to talk a little bit about our program, and that, we're 3 years into our SMART program. We've secured funding through year 4. I hear words like sustainability. It might seem okay, so a little bit taller. The program's been great. It would be tough to see the justice system in Irving County without it. But it's nice to see that we've got and have secured currently, as we speak, 4 years of funding. Through Doug's office, it was a lot easier this go round than it was last go round. So when I hear other people saying, well, that's just too tough, I just can't do it, it just can't be done, I said, well, let me tell you about 3 years ago and what that looked like. Much more difficult, and there was no money up front, and it was just all much more difficult. So I guess that rings a little bit hollow when I hear people say that. Personal opinion, but I know there's definitely difficulties. In that vein, my director of court services presented with Doug's folks here at a conference here at a mental health conference, I believe it was about a month ago. I think that went really well. We've had some really good feedback. There's been several folks reach out to us, both state level and federal level as well. Not really that familiar with all of them. I know one of them was the National Criminal Justice Association, I believe, maybe another something ventures entity, a big entity. I did look at it briefly and I thought, my goodness, they probably do have some funding. And,
Arnold has a lot.
that would be the one. So I was unfamiliar with it, and I'm still mostly unfamiliar with it, but I'm, curious when things like that happen. Be like, well, what kind of funding are we talking about? Wow, this place has so many employees. They have to have some funding. But anyway, so our program is the self-management and recovery training. It's called Youth and Family SMART Program. And as part of that, and Amy, I know you mentioned some things, but there's individual for the juvenile, there's group for the juvenile, There's family centered therapy as part of it, which we get through the triple P, which is a robust triple P. You have to lean on that a little bit, but there's been no pushback. Parents like it and have been very, complimentary, quite frankly. So that's been a great thing. We also work with JDAI, Parenting the Teen Brain. They like that too. There's a lot of aha moments, that come from the parents, as probably came from many of us at one time. You're like, well, yeah, I guess that's not really just a little adult. I guess they do think a little bit different. So that's been worthwhile. Youth Connection is also part of it. So, sometimes our folks will take juveniles to, let's say, a Cincinnati Reds game. We've had them say, well, without this program, I would have never gone and been able to go to a Cincinnati Reds game. So that says something. And then it also is about building that community. Then they're very appreciative of that because they then see that it's not all just being onerous and disciplinarian on them. There's good things with it as well. And then most recently, we've started working with our CASA program to have like a mentorship program where we have a CASA that will also take these children to some place that maybe they may not be able to go without it. I think one of them was like to the Corvette Museum and things along those lines. So it's been huge. And I just say that because I think a lot of times we start talking about theory and we start talking about numbers, we start talking about data points, we start talking about this stuff, but what do we really hear about? That's what we're really here about. And then you'll see, in my community, I think it's really having a positive, very positive outcome. I think as far as like our felony petitions filed, they're way down, like practically non-existent. When I took office, they were existent. Let me just say that. So it has had a really good effect. And of course, it's just not in isolation. We have the truancy program. We have the alternative to suspension program. We also have expedited processing for children that are using drugs in schools. So, and that's in collaboration with the sheriff and with the prosecutor. So when that happens, it's not a referral and it gets lost in the system for 30 days or 60 days. That child gets services pretty well immediately. And then if they do fall into the system, then we have the SMART program, which again is progress driven, which means essentially if they do all these things, which they generally do, then they graduate early and their probation can even terminate early. So it's kind of got a diversionary principle as well to it. And in that vein, as far as our program, right now we have 6 people in the state of Florida training that have been provided this training through, I think, Dr. Alsman, you mentioned braided financing. And I look to Nancy here because that's being funded through JAI. So they're working well. And if you don't have that sort of thing, and if you're just dealing with one program and you don't have that braided funding, I think it's very difficult. And so even something like that could be something where someone that is very familiar with how to do that might be of help to maybe others that are not. Because, that strikes me as something that maybe, and just having spoken to some other folks, I always hear tales of difficulty, I'm thinking, I know that there's a way to do it. Sometimes we overcomplicate things, certainly I do, but I think it can also be facilitated through the braided funding. As it relates to the program, we've had 30 graduates so far, and we've had 1 recipient within 6 months. And the juvenile's life, 6 months can be a fair amount of time. So that's a pretty good, ratio so far. I'm sure it'll go down from there. I'm a realist. I'm an optimist and a realist, but probably not going to continue to shoot that sort of percentage. But that's really what how I appreciate the program and how I appreciate the funding. Maybe one of the reasons why I show up to these meetings, because I know how important it can be. We're a county of 28,000 people. And as Dr. Alsma just said, even those with the bigger counties might have more people. And if we can do it, I feel like most places can. And it really, when you see, and some of the kids have said, because they fill out the questionnaire when they're done with the program, of course, for the integrity of the program. And they're like, this sort of program should be in it. Or you should, I think they said you should take kids from other counties. I'm like, no, other counties maybe should have the same program. We can't take everybody. It's a small program, but it is. I think the folks in Florida, I think we have 2 master's level therapists that are there right now. We have peer support specialists. We have our coordinator and a probation officer. So there's a lot going on, but I think that's why we're all here. So that's all.
Yeah, Liz.
I just wanted to add, Judge King, I did get to see that presentation and it was excellent. And to me, the most exciting thing was the very meaningful questions and notes. I know there were probation officers from Brown County. I think one said they were from Hendricks. There was a lot of excited, wow, maybe we could do this too. So I think if you're being asked to put that presentation on other places, I think it was really valuable from that point of view.
But the other thing that I think is really important and might speak to some legislation or legislators is our entire program runs off less financially than the placement of one child in residential treatment annually. I mean, that to me is a pretty easy selling point. I mean, because it's gotten so expensive, it's hundreds of dollars a day, so, I mean, I think many times they lead with that. So, because that speaks to a lot of us. I mean, even if, being conservative, be like, well, it still makes sense. I mean, but there are, it is progress driven. So, I mean, if progress is not being made, then, it doesn't work. But so far, been making progress.
Do we have another question, Catherine?
Sort of answered it with the cost. That was 1A. And then you mentioned that your felony filings have gone down. Is there a way, maybe this is a question for you, but is there a way to relate those two things so that might be something that the legislation would be interested in seeing too? But then that cuts down on all sorts of costs. I don't know if there's a way to prove that. Spot.
I don't know, Judge King, with how your data is gathered, it is a little bit hard without randomization, but you can definitely look at pre-post, look at you before the program and after, every way to kind of conjecture what may have been. Yeah.
Almost anecdotal, I mean, I could get, in a small county, I could get 3 felony petitions next week, and that would skew my numbers pretty quickly. So I also don't want to create a false impression because, with limited subsets of data, then you can really change things quickly. So it's almost from an anecdotal perspective. I've been there for 12 years and I can tell when I came in, it was heroin, meth, and fentanyl. Now it's cannabis. It's the cannabis and I mean, there's different things at play there, I think, too, as well, because cannabis has got so strong that maybe they don't need a higher, what we would call a harder drug. So there's that as well. So it's hard to make any extrapolation.
Another interesting question to me is how many of those parents who are in your programming for their oldest child have younger siblings, and do those siblings show up later? I would think improved parenting skill helps divert those younger youth too. I don't know how you look at that number, but yeah. And I appreciate, Judge King, that you've become our chief cheerleader on the grant issue. And he does at juvenile conferences. He says to people, pish posh, this, you can do this, So I appreciate that.
And my people are willing to help. I mean, we kind of have a little bit of a playbook, and we've given that to places before. I really think with Doug and Doug's team, it's much easier. I mean, we were like, oh, what did I do this? Maybe I shouldn't have done it. 3 years ago, it was a lot more difficult. So now, I'm trying to be polite, but when I hear that, I'm like, you just don't know how tough it could have been. But finding therapists and stuff like that is a real world problem too. I feel, but what I also do believe is when you get a therapist involved, they enjoy it so much because they're seeing tangible results and they're like, this is what I went to school for. This is what I went into this profession for. And then when that therapist leaves, guess what? You've got another one that's ready to take over because they're built to cycle. They're like, they want to make a difference. We're not alone in that endeavor. So I've been impressed by that. Choices Emergency Response Team has provided therapists for us. They've been wonderful to work with. That's who we've leaned on. I think they have offices not just in Southeastern, but throughout the state, I believe.
Thank you, Judge King. Nancy?
I just wondered if there might be an opportunity for a research project around SMART. Just hearing about this, like maybe a longer term kind of academic approach to, because that would be super cool. I don't know if it's you or if it's somebody else down close to Ripley, but that'd be super cool to see. The Youth Justice Team at the Indiana Office of Court Services is currently working with 37 JDAI counties. Those are our active counties. We have had a few come and go, basically when changes in leadership occur. In those 37 counties, we serve 74% of the youth population in Indiana, ages 10 to 17. So even though we are not quite in half of our counties, and I say not quite, because we also work with counties that are not JDI counties, we are actively working in about 3 counties that are not identified as JDAI, but our team does serve all counties related to youth justice system improvement, policy development, all of those kinds of things. And as that word is getting out, we are getting more questions funneled to us, both by our partners at IOCS, but then also folks out in the communities who've said, hey, they came and did system mapping with us and it was really helpful. And so that's good news. I have one just I think maybe as we think about Judge Kenworthy's ask for next time, and that is, I did a presentation for the Public Defender Council recently, and I'd done it before for, I think it was Intrepid, where I went back to really look at Indiana's history of youth legal system improvement. And the farthest I could go back into a statewide initiative was 2003 to the Juvenile Law Commission. Does anybody remember that? Was anybody around? Yeah. Okay. So the Juvenile Law Commission back in 2003, it was under the governor's office, and they made a ton of recommendations. They spent about 3 years developing this plan, and then nothing really happened. And I think in my like history lesson of that, it was really because there was no group to carry forward those recommendations. And I appreciate very much efficiency in combining work groups and making sure that the work is efficient. And I also just want to put a challenge out there that there is no other group that specifically focuses on youth justice in Indiana than this group. And as we are thinking, the behavioral health group, if it merges with the CISC work group, my question is, if we no longer have any behavioral health challenges for youth in the justice system, yes, that makes sense. Or make sure that is a focus of that group under the Children's Commission or whatever, where else it goes, because there is no other group. We're it. And if we start, and again, I want to say it again, I appreciate efficiency. I don't want to go to meetings I don't have to go to. But if the work isn't done, it's possible that there needs to get some more, with Judge Dolahaney saying like, there has to be like and Magistrate Richardson, there has to be a local voice in this, like how it impacts. So maybe it's getting more local folks involved, those ad hoc committees, understanding how things work, because our team is working with local folks all the time, and there are still things out there that need to happen. And so I maybe sound like I'm on my soapbox. I think you said soapbox earlier, Dr. Alsma, but think about it from that perspective, that if there's still work to be done, then the groups need to continue in some way, shape, or form. And I think about that a lot as I think about the priorities, which I very much appreciate. And if we can maintain that, if this group doesn't do it, who will?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Nancy. I appreciate that. Yeah, we've got a lot of work to do, and the charge for this group was not do these things and go away. The charge was you are the people overseeing the juvenile justice system. And so that's why I think it's important now that we look at what's going on in today's world. We've accomplished many of the tasks in that report, still working on some, but there is a lot of work yet to be done. I heard two things over here I just want to piggyback on. One is soapbox. I heard it twice today. And does anyone know the origin of that? So, orphan trains. After the First World War, there were a lot of orphans on the East Coast, and they were little street urchins kind of on the streets. And so they loaded up these little orphans and sent them west on trains, and they would make various stops along the way. Indiana, as a state, is one of the states that took the most orphans off these trains. Families would show up to meet these children. Isn't this a terrible picture of putting these little children on trains? But the littlest ones were small, so they stood on their little soapbox so they could be seen better. So think about how a soapbox ties to youth work. The kids who need to be seen the most are our kids, right? Yeah. So that's one thing I wanted to tie in. And the other is baseball game. But for this program, I couldn't have gone to a baseball game. That's exactly why we do this work. Exactly. And I'm sure you have all had those kids come back years later and say, because of you, because of this intervention, because of this program, because of this one thing you said to me, I did XYZ and I am where I am. And I will share that this past week I had 3 of those. So all now youth engaged in law school. So I again go back to my resiliency and the amazing structure of kids, right? How do you go through all of these things? And it's this one thing that can turn the corner for you. And you turn around and now you're ready to go into the world and help other youth like you. For Steve's benefit, I will share that one of those said, but for my AP government teacher, but for the We the People program, I would not have had the confidence to go to law school. So our educators are doing it, our frontline people are doing it. And so I just want to say, this is important work that we do. So June 11th, come with fire in your belly, and we'll talk about how we can chart a course to make our system better over the next year. So any other business for the good of the order? Nancy?
I was way up on my soapbox. I'm sorry, and I forgot something. The Youth Justice Conference that's going to happen in October of this year. Our team is involved in the planning. We are going to send a survey out to all of you that basically says, what are the top 3 things you want to see as part of this conference? We're doing it internally at IOCS. We're doing it with you all. We're going to do it with local folks that we have contact with. So we really want to make sure we're meeting the needs and what you all see as important. So we'll look out for that survey and please complete it.
Anything else? All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thinking through, yeah. Where's there? Like, probably. Stephanie Campbell is a one judge business, and so